Welcome everyone. I'm Jitesh Weedle, Program Director for Data Science and Digital Health Initiatives at MDIC, the Medical Device Innovation Consortium. I'm super excited about this opportunity to present the medical extended reality based session here. Those who are new, MDIC is a non-profit public-private partnership purely focusing on advancing regulatory science for the betterment of our patients. The medical extended reality initiative is relatively new at MDIC, but I'm really excited that we have an awesome group of subject matter experts guiding us, and six of them are here today to go through some of the aspects of medical extended reality in this session here. Without further ado, let me introduce our panelists. We have Ryan Beams, who is PhD in physics, and is the coordinator for medical extended reality programs at FDA. Dr. Heather Benz is Associate Director for Clinical Research for Robotics and Digital Solution at Ethicon, which is part of Johnson & Johnson medical device companies. Prior to Johnson & Johnson, she was a scientist at FDA. By training, she is a biomedical engineering, and she was also faculty at Johns Hopkins University. We have Bob Fine, who is the Executive Director and founder of IVRHA, which is International Virtual Reality and Healthcare Association. Bob launched vrvoice.co, a content vertical exploring virtual reality in the enterprise. And he also coordinates largest annual conference on virtual reality in healthcare, both in US and Europe. Annie Saha, she is the Assistant Director for Digital Health Center for Excellence at CDRH, Office of Strategic Partnership and Technology Innovation. She is a biomedical engineer by training. We also have Jennifer Silva. She is the Director, Pediatric Electrophysiology, Associate Professor at WashU. She is also the co-founder and Chief Medical Officer for Senti AR, a company developing virtual, augmented, and mixed reality tools for physicians in operation room. And we also have Alexandra Popovic, who is the Innovation Manager for Image-Guided Therapy at Philips. She is electrical engineer by training. Welcome all the panelists. We have a series of questions, and as you heard, our panelists have very diverse background, very expansive background. Let's jump into the questions. The first question is, where do you see MXR, medical extended reality, having the greatest impact on healthcare? I'll invite Bob, and then we can follow with the others. Bob.
Well, Hitesh, thanks very much for having me, and real pleasure to be among this distinguished panel. So that's a really tough question, because I think in some ways it's easier to try to think about what areas won't be impacted by medical XR, VR, or AR, but I think from an understanding for the audience, it's important to realize that the technology is impacting three major groups. We've got healthcare practitioners, so nurses, physicians, technicians. You've got patients, end user, and then you have students, whether it's medical students or continuing education students, physicians, nurses getting their CEs. And their VR and AR are playing roles in all those areas. I think from a patient perspective, I think one of the most exciting areas is the early opportunity to treat chronic pain. There's been some great early studies for this, very strong use of distraction therapy. But in terms of healthcare in general, what I like to say is, if you can think of any aspect within healthcare, someone is developing a VR or AR app for that. Whether that makes sense or not is a different discussion, but I'll leave it at that.
Silva, do you want to chime in?
Sure. So thank you for starting that conversation off, Bob. That was fantastic. And thank you, Jitesh, for having me speak today. So to sort of piggyback on what Bob's talking about, I come at it from the clinical perspective. And so the way I bucket these technologies is educational, pre-procedural planning, and then intra-procedural. And then there's this fourth bucket of rehabilitation, which is an expanding group, as Bob has alluded to. My particular interest, being an interventional electrophysiologist, is in the intra-procedural space. And I do think that it's an incredibly rich opportunity for minimally invasive procedures, for what Alex is probably going to allude to is the image-guided therapies, where we're doing procedures in a very minimally invasive way. Where I think we really need to be diligent is in building data to support that these technologies are going to have a positive impact for the users. For our technology, that's the physician, but really the end user for the procedure is the patient. So creating a rich data set to show that these technologies are more than just fun, but really are going to impact patients in a positive manner. I do want to add one more thing for the patient-centric focus here. Like I said, I'm a proceduralist, which means that I get informed consent from my patients before we do procedures. What's been really eye-opening is to be able to show them the kinds of things that we do during their procedure using, in our case, mixed reality. And the reactions from the pediatric patients, from their families, has really showed me how much better we can do with even things we consider to be very basic and fundamental, things like informed consent. So I actually, similar to what Bob alluded to, I think that the sky's the limit, but I think we have to be very careful in how we develop these technologies.
Thanks, Silva. And Heather, you come with a very different background and viewpoint. Do you want to chime in?
Sure, thank you. And thank you as well for including me on a really exciting panel. It's a fantastic opportunity to join a very exciting conversation with just getting off the ground. And what I see, absolutely agree, Bob and Jennifer, that there are tremendous opportunities in many different areas, even just the patient engagement, right, around improved delivery of therapy. Just because folks want to play the game more, that's fantastic. What we also see is real opportunities in surgery, and that goes all the way from surgeon training to surgical planning, intervention, and then post-op. What I'm really excited about is what we're seeing in the literature around moving from 2D imaging to a 3D representation. There are opportunities to increase diagnostic accuracy, according to early reports in the literature. There have been folks who have identified tumor location and blood supply more effectively. And there have been others who are measuring operative time, seeing reductions in operative time, seeing reductions in intraoperative bleeding or other complications. Now, these are all early reports, often single center, but I think it shows a real promising opportunity to upgrade our patient outcome with tools that are available now.
Heather, I'm going to add on something you just said, because I think it's really important. And we're really proud to be contributing to that literature showing that these three-dimensional models are in fact improving our navigational accuracy. And it's more than just the 3D visualization. I think what we're doing is we're starting to empower physicians to use and control their data in a way they've never been able to do before. And understanding those relationships is more than just a visualization phenomenon. It's also being able to manipulate the models so they can really precisely understand what they're going to be doing. I think to the casual user, we think of this as a visualization technology, but the deeper you wade into it, you see that that is simply the first value of many, many more to come. And I think where I see this in the lab as being very powerful is in that data control place.
I think it's already established that this is an important field, up and coming field. That means also it poses a lot of challenges. It can be technical challenges, regulatory challenges, or even clinical challenges. So maybe I can, ask Silva itself, briefly talk about the challenges faced by this technology to translate it into the medical, for the medical applications.
Sure. And this list is going to be pretty exhaustive. So I'm just going to use this as an opportunity to talk about my challenges bringing these technologies in. There are clearly the hardware challenges, and we've approached this by saying we're going to partner with smarter people who are better than us at doing this. That's the approach that Sentier has taken, and I think it's quite frankly a smart one, because there really are very smart people working on this problem. I see this as an implementation challenge, and so there's going to be bringing these technologies into the hospital. How do we do that within a hospital IT infrastructure? How is that going to be accepted by the hospital? Is it going to be accepted by the hospital? I think we have yet to sort of determine some of those things. I am going to get back, and this is, for those of you who know me, this is going to be my soapbox, and I promise I won't say this again, but we have to be generating hard data. We have to be generating repeatable outcome measurements that are going to impact our patients. In addition to the, yes, I feel good using this technology kind of data set. That's important, but we have to really be patient-focused, patient-centric, and really doing the best thing for our patients. And I think if we use that as our North Star, we're going to see a lot of these barriers to implementation, clinical implementation, in my perspective, I think we're going to see them disappear. I'm excited to hear other people's comments.
Heather?
Yeah, absolutely aligned with that. And what we hear over and over is the patients are very excited about this. And what I want to drive towards is being able to demonstrate to the community the value in the improved patient outcome. Now, there are many other challenges, of course, as well. There's an alignment that we hear needs to happen around the relevant benefit risk question. What does drive patient outcome in this state? There's really interesting science to be done around human-device interaction. What information is helpful for our clinical users? How can you play it most helpfully? How do you give docs the right amount of information at the right time to really help drive those improved patient outcomes? So many different areas of science. That's just one of them. And I think that the community is diving in, but at this point, there's an opportunity for alignment. What are the critical drivers? What are the critical questions? And how can we knock them out one by one?
Thanks, Heather. We do want to talk about the solutions, or how can we address these challenges. Hold your thoughts for a second there. I also wanted to bring Annie and Ryan to the discussion. So both of them represent FDA. So Annie and Ryan, what unique role do you see either FDA or, for Annie's case, Digital Health Center for Excellence play in this, rapidly developing applications for AR, VR technology in medicine? And what are some experience from other areas in digital health that would benefit the MXR community? So I'll start with Annie.
Sure. Thanks, Jitesh, and also echo everyone's thanks. I'm really excited for this panel and discussion, and I think it's going to be a really great way to continue to build this collaboration as we move forward and discuss all the different challenges that you heard from Bob and Jennifer and Heather, and how can we collaborate together. And that's really one of the main tenets of the Digital Health Center of Excellence, is how do we empower stakeholders, whether you're talking about the healthcare providers or the patients, and how do we collaborate to bring those together so we can ultimately understand the outcome. So let's get the hard science. Let's understand the regulatory science. Let's bring everyone together to really solve these questions, rather than trying to do a lot of one-off types of activities. And that's really what our goal is and what we're trying to do with the Digital Health Center of Excellence. That includes our internal partnerships with folks like Ryan and his teams, as well as externally through MDIC and the individual conversations we're having with the folks on this panel and elsewhere. And just thinking about sort of the broad holistic picture. And I think one thing too, I did want to add, and picking up from the previous thread as well, in terms of challenges or an area we don't want to lose sight on, is sort of the health equity aspect. And along those lines, we actually have been partnering with our Office of Minority Health and Health Equity and the UCSF Stanford CIRSE, working with the Zuckerberg San Francisco General hospital about usability testing for VR devices in low income and diverse populations so that we're making sure we're not creating some additional digital divide with these technologies. So that sort of is a high level of some of the various aspects of what we're thinking about and seeing from the Digital Health Center of Excellence and really from the FDA perspective. I'll turn it over to Ryan, and then Jitesh, I can answer your other part of the question about successes in other areas.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you again for hosting us and having us be a part of this panel. It's been great so far. So there are a few things I wanted to add that we're also working on at the FDA. So I'm part of the Office of Science and Engineering Laboratories. And so we have a program that's focused on trying to address the regulatory science questions around these devices. And to give a little bit of history, so as I think we've heard from Bob and Jennifer and Heather, both in their answers to the first two questions, there's a lot of buckets, there's a lot of application areas, there's a lot of exciting things that are happening. And while the FDA wants to do everything we can to tackle these problems, it's too big for us to do by ourselves. And so a little over a year ago, we hosted a public workshop to try to start some of these community discussions. And this working group is really an extension of that so that we can get together and hopefully start to figure out how we can address these gaps and challenges ahead of time before it starts to slow down the regulatory process. And then if I could add just one more thing, which I think ties in to the second question and what was highlighted with the different buckets. I think one thing that makes this application area both interesting and challenging from an evaluation standpoint is that there is such a broad range of applications. And then as Jennifer pointed out, and she's certainly not alone, a lot of companies are using devices that have been manufactured by some of the large tech companies and that were primarily designed for entertainment and then translating them to this new space. And it's a great way to approach it, but it also opens up a lot of questions as these devices are used in different applications. And of course, the challenges for each application is also different. So that's kind of our perspective of where we fit into this and what we're trying to do to help.
Annie, do you want to jump back in?
Sure, and I think actually Ryan brings up some great points of both with VR, AR, but then in other parts of digital health, when you're going from more of a consumer space like wearables and other types of technologies into a more medical space, we really have to think about all those different challenges. And so the ability of bringing groups together through MDIC to really focus on, maybe we start picking on specific use cases to really start in one area and then continuing to build. And one area we are already seeing some of that ongoing is in the artificial intelligence and machine learning space. And MDIC has a subgroup in the clinical diagnostic space where they're using the clinical diagnostics as a use case for understanding when to think about or what to think about in terms of algorithm change protocols and predetermined change control plans, and biting almost one piece off at a time with one specific use case that does potentially have the ability to be applicable more broadly. And I think it's going to probably be something similar as we're thinking about the MXR space as well.
Thanks, Annie. And what we are hearing is rather than trying to solve these problems individually, community efforts are going to be the way to go. And I know Bob has been in this field for quite a while, and he has a lot of experience in working, as a community or in community, specifically to address the challenges. So Bob, do you want to elaborate how community efforts can, help us to overcome some of these challenges?
Yeah, I guess actually I'll kind of roll that into a comment I wanted to make on Ryan's thoughts, because it was dawning on me an area that the community is struggling with quite a bit today, and probably is not getting as much attention as it should be, is the use of VR, AR healthcare applications in pediatrics. We have there's a lot of exciting stuff going on in terms of application, whether it's diagnosing a number of different ailments. But I think the community is really struggling to determine what the appropriate age uses are, what the appropriate use cases are, and if there are opportunities to be using it in pediatrics, what are the limitations on time that should be imposed? There are some arbitrary understandings out there from different manufacturers. So, you shouldn't use it for anybody below the age of 13. I don't think there's any scientific or strong understanding behind that. It's a bit of a liability age, and that's important. But it's there's so many different great things going on. It's something we do need to get a handle on. Otherwise, everybody's kind of just moving along and maybe taking some unnecessary risks. It's hard to say. I guess just to finish on your general question. The thing that I wake up every day trying to think through from the community and industry standpoint is how do we educate the marketplace? Because it is so huge. Just here in the United States, with 20% of our economy is healthcare related, and the one issue with XR, VR, AR is it's extremely difficult to explain, even visually through a computer, demonstrate the capabilities and the impact. And I've seen time and time again so much when people demo it in person, light bulbs go on everywhere. And I think the more of the industry that comes to appreciate the technology and what its capabilities of, the more they'll get involved in dealing with many of these issues that we're all struggling with, because we can't figure it out all on our own. And if we want to get mass adoption, it's going to require mass usage from the different constituencies.
Heather, do you want to chime in?
Sure. I think that what we're seeing is an opportunity to bring in a variety of stakeholders, right? Make sure that we have the users in the picture, make sure that we have healthcare as well as patient perspectives, but then also align regulatory and industry in a pre-competitive space about what are the biggest questions for the community to tackle. This particularly around risks, right? What are the risks that do pose a substantial issue that needs to be addressed? What are the risks where we have controls or we can identify the controls, right? So that those are mitigated. We'll be able, as a community, to then develop the frameworks, develop the test methodologies in order to characterize and control. We're also going to need to think about how are we demonstrating the clinically meaningful benefit. And that group is really well poised to do that because, as we've heard, that's very different in very different applications. And in some cases, it'll rely upon the medical specialties background, but in some cases, we're going to see something new. And how can we characterize that? When can we characterize that? How can we do it quickly and efficiently in order to accelerate, patient access to those benefits?
Thanks, Heather. Now, I think there are a lot of aspects yet to be, solved or figured. But in your view, what are the important clinical aspects in medicine to measure for with reference to AR, VR? Heather, I'll start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I mentioned it's going to be specialty specific in some cases. The therapeutic areas that we're already seeing, do we need to not only look at the outcomes with controlled use, but do we need to understand, is there increased utilization, right? And does that then drive improved patient outcomes? And then similarly, in the surgical space, is there improved surgical planning? And so you can give surgeons a controlled scenario where they have the opportunity to carefully map out 2D and 3D scenarios, and then always arrive at the perfect answer. Or you can see what real world use looks like and understand with, as Jennifer mentioned, the control of the data, with the ability to explore and integrate into their planning and procedure. Does that in a real world setting lead to improved outcomes? These are some tough questions. And we're going to want to also look at what can we do before we get to a clinical setting. What can we understand about how the user interacts with the device and what they want from the device, and how that interaction can be made most efficient. We'll pause there. I'm sure there's much more we can dive into. But ultimately, what we're looking for is the patient benefit. So when the rubber meets the road and we see that patient outcomes are improving, that we're going to know.
Jennifer, you also work with a lot of physicians and hospital systems and so on. What are your take on it?
Yeah, I think Heather nailed it. I think that if we try a one-size-fits-all approach to this technology, we're going to fail pretty miserably. And I think the other thing we have to do is learn from other technologies. And so I think, for instance, I think it's really important that we learn from the 3D printing space, right? They tried to address some of these very questions we're talking about here, but really didn't clearly identify endpoints that were related specifically to 3D printing. They tried these very grand outcome measures like procedure time or time in an ICU. And I'm the first person to say there's about 1 million confounders in there that you can't control, right? So it's a tough way to evaluate a technology when we use these really grandiose metrics. Our approach to that internally has been to say, let's actually take very small, quantifiable, measurable things and build that story to developing the end story, which is improvement in patient outcomes. I think that when we start putting groups together that are thinking about education, patient-facing applications like the rehabilitation applications or the surgical intraprocedural applications, we're going to find that the outcome metrics, the endpoints, are going to be vastly different. And I think if we start outlining that forwardly today and in the working groups that MDIC has going on, I think the community at large is going to be much better for it.
Okay. Jen, thanks for calling out the MDIC working group. Ryan, you are one of the co-chairs for the working group along with Heather, and some of our audience may not know about, they might be new to this particular platform. So would you elaborate the structure of the working group and what we are doing briefly?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So the working group is really just starting. So some of the structure and the boundaries of it, we're still working through, but I actually think that's part of what makes it an exciting group to be a part of. So what we're trying to do is bring together stakeholders involved in all stages of the development. So from hardware manufacturers, academia, clinical practitioners, and then of course, like regulatory side, companies large and small, to get everyone together to start talking about what some of the gaps and challenges are with these devices. So we're still in the process of figuring out the landscape, and then we'll split into subgroups to try to work on specific deliverables. But I'm definitely very excited about what we've gotten started so far. It's a great group of people. Some of them are on this call. And I think there's a lot of room for other people to get involved and to help out and join the effort.
Annie, I mean, do you want to highlight on what kind of stakeholders are important for these kind of community efforts? And I know you've been associated with a lot of collaborative communities as well as other external partnership activities. So do you want to give us some thoughts on how can we make this work?
Well, I think Ryan highlighted a lot of the already existing members, which does include a fair amount of the stakeholders. I think one thing we want to be clear on is that MDIC is open to all stakeholders to really make sure that we are incorporating all of those different perspectives, because there are a lot of challenging issues here that you've heard from all of the panelists thus far. We can't think about patient outcomes and what's important from a patient perspective without including patients as part of that conversation. You can't think about what's important to healthcare providers or how do we communicate the information or how do we train or educate without including healthcare providers. So we really need to ensure that we have all those different groups together. And I really liked how, Jennifer laid out, we need to think about not the grandiose big outcomes. That's important to think about what's that long term, but in the short term, what are those pieces that we can focus on that we can actually keep building the evidence, keep building the outcomes? Because ultimately, we're really talking about some kind of evidence generation about how are these technologies really working? How is it impacting clinical care? How is it impacting patient care? But you're not going to get to the end without those intermediate steps. And so groups like MDIC and really bringing all these stakeholders together can really work to prioritize and figure out which pieces to try to start to tackle first, and then just keep building from there.
Yeah, Annie and Ryan, those are very important comments. Actually, I want to highlight here that though MDIC is a membership-based consortium with industry as well as FDA and other federal entities as member, for the MXR Working Group, which Ryan and Heather are co-leading, we have no restriction that you should be a member of MDIC. We have open. It's open. The reason why we have kept it open is this is an up-and-coming field, and the traditional membership of MDIC cannot by itself solve or tackle all these problems. So we need additional stakeholders. For example, the game developers, software manufacturers, and even maybe network providers if it is a 5G connected devices and so on. So there are a lot of elements which are beyond the traditional medtech spectrum. So that's why we have kept it open. So if you are interested to learn more about the working group or to collaborate with us, just shoot an email to mxr@mdic.org. We'll be promptly responding and inviting you to the community. And I also wanted to give a shout out to the physician community, the patient community, because we find it a little challenging to recruit patients and patient advocates to this kind of working groups, even though it is open and free, but it's logistically not easy. But if you happen to know someone, or if you are have other networks where you can tap into, so please connect us. So that's the way we can build bigger networks and have more inclusive community. And as Jennifer mentioned, and of course Heather also highlighted, the patient outcomes is one where if that's what we are looking at, their voice is equally important. And I want to come back to Jennifer, because Jennifer has got a very unique perspective. You are with a startup company, and of course focusing on AR in surgical applications. What are the lessons you learned so far?
Innumerable. And the nice thing is that I'm continuing to learn them, which means that we're just at the tip of the iceberg. I'm going to answer your question, but I'm going to loop in one of Bob's comments. And a little story. Many, many moons ago, my dad brought home an IBM PC Junior and sat me in front of it and said, "This will be important. Learn to program." And his friends thought he was crazy. He was totally right. And that ended up being very important. Fast forward, I have two kids who are young enough that maybe the AAP will come and slap me on the wrist for this, but who spend quite a bit of time in virtual and mixed reality and totally get it, right? They explore space through NASA apps on HoloLens. They do all sorts of cool educational things where they're learning a lot. So what I think is happening here is a similar evolution and revolution to what happened when I was a kid and when computers were becoming miniaturized and going to become something that, we walk around with in our purses, if you will, right? So I think we're just at the beginning of this. I think that makes it so exciting to be in this part of it and to be looking at it from the lens of how can I use this incredible technology, this empowering technology to take better care of patients. But again, I go back to this. We have to, as a community, start using the same language. We're going to have to, as a community, decide what we're going to define as success and failure. And I quite frankly think that when I get to be old and retired and my kids are hopefully practicing paleontology and veterinary medicine, that they will be using these technologies every day in their future careers. And so if we do this right, we're setting up generations to do much better than us. And I think that for me is something I think about every day. And I know that Bob's done an incredible job organizing this community. We have a responsibility.
Thanks, Jennifer. I know this discussions about this MXR field, it can go on and on. For example, for the working group meetings we had so far, each of the discussion, we never finished in 1 hour. I think even 2 hours, we cannot finish it, I think. But for the interest of the time, we wanted to have this, a closure of the session. So I just, maybe, give an opportunity for each of the panelists, give some, final comments before we can finish. Bob, you want to go first?
Sure, thanks. I think I'll actually just kind of finish on Jennifer's thoughts, and thank you for the kind words. I think what's also important to keep in mind, which is it's both very, very exciting and both very challenging at the same time, is the speed at which the technology is changing. Headsets are evolving at a rate twice as fast as mobile handsets were evolving. We're seeing next generation headsets coming out 18 months. And it's so hard just to keep up with the current technology, build your planning, build your testing methodology, with a certain parameters. And now all of a sudden, we've got a whole new set of opportunities. And we've got very early headsets now with biometric data collection coming out, which adds greatly to the opportunity. So it's just going to be very, very tough to keep up. And maybe as we think about the working group, we need to maybe take into account how do we manage that generational change in everything that we're doing at the same time.
Heather.
Yeah, and thank you again. This discussion has already been helpful for me, and I know that it kicks off a really important discussion that will continue in the working group. So I just wanted to reiterate, what you had said, Jitesh, that more voices in this pre-competitive space will help us accelerate patient access to these technologies in a way that improves their care. And that means not only the patient voice, but also the provider voice. We also need the engineers to tell us what's possible and what problems they're running up against. So we're all going to roll up our sleeves together, do some pre-competitive work, and it's the time to make sure that your questions, your challenges are heard, so that your patient population can benefit from the hard work that this group is going to do. I'm very excited to see this group take off. And you're right, the brainstorming has been fast, frantic, furious, and really productive. So we've already got more questions to tackle than we can possibly begin on. But this is the time to prioritize, and this is the time to make sure that our actions now really shape the landscape and lead to a sea change in healthcare.
Yeah, I think what we've really been talking about, especially in the past few minutes, is really the ultimate sort of promise of digital health technologies broadly, whether you're talking about VR, AR, MXR, whichever acronym you feel like using for it, but even more broadly with all the technology incorporating that's changing over time. And so that's something we're trying to grapple with at FDA and through the Digital Health Center of Excellence and in our collaborations externally. And so also just thinking about, can we also learn from other fields, there's similar issues with technology changing, whether you're talking about wearables, whether you're talking about AI, ML. So let's also learn from all the different efforts that are also ongoing in other spaces so that we don't start to reinvent wheels. And also let's see what hasn't worked. So I really like, Jennifer, you brought up the 3D printing example is, okay, let's see what maybe didn't work with some of that. And so let's use all those lessons learned. And by bringing people together through this MDIC effort with all the different stakeholders, we can try to make sure that, one, we're not reinventing any wheels, we're able to learn from other areas, and then ultimately we're able to drive the field forward and get to that next generation that's really able to use all of this really cool technologies is just a normal part of their day-to-day life, and ultimately improving the health for all people.
Jennifer.
Thanks. I want to echo what everybody has said, and I think people have spoken about this in a much more eloquent way than I have. But I'm guessing that people who are watching this panel probably have something important to add. And so I would encourage the people that are watching this to go to the MDIC website and to put their names in and to be a voice and be an advocate for the place you are, the group that you represent, and make sure that we're doing what's right. Like I said, we're at a very early stage, and that means that it's going to be very impactful. So I do hope that the people watching will take the opportunity to work with us.
Ryan.
Yeah, thank you again for organizing this. And I agree with everything that was said in this wrap-up comments. So I wanted to tie into what Bob said. I think because of the rate of development of the hardware, that's why a group like this is particularly important, so that we can start identifying what the questions are, what the challenges are, and hopefully step by step bring down the barrier for companies to get their devices to market. And as Jennifer said, and several of the others, because it's so new and there's so many open questions, that it really is a great time to get involved and make a big impact.
Thanks, Ryan. I think you heard the opportunities with the MXR field and as well as the challenges. And we have the opportunity to bring the stakeholders. Actually, what MDIC is good at is to bring the stakeholders in the pre-competitive phase. So we have the MXR Working Group, but I also want to say that almost all the resources which MDIC is putting together to advance regulatory science is available free of cost. And I would highly encourage you to browse through MDIC website to find there are a lot of resources for patient benefit risk, diagnostics field, case for quality program, and there are a lot of good resources which small businesses, large businesses, everybody can leverage, utilize. And if you want to collaborate with us, be part of some discussion groups, please do send a note to us. For this particular group, a simple email address, mxr@mdic.org. With that, I wanted to really thank our panelists. These are the individuals, along with many others, helping us MDIC to drive the MXR Working Group and figure out some solutions for some of the challenges we're all facing, and really reap the benefit of the technology, the advances in the technology to the betterment of patients. Thanks for watching. Thank you all.